I think we always have to look at qualities and skills rather than experience.
I always give the people a speech of like, I'm here for your whole career, not just your career at company X. And I think that really opens people up.
The talent market immediately shifted and it was like, wow, there's so much talent that's available. And I think as revenue leaders, we actually have to account for that.
I think the enthusiasm, it really resonates with me too, because I see some people being like, I don't know, I'm still playing the field and this and that. I'm like, no, you got to be all in for every role because that's definitely what people are looking for. So do you have a favorite interview question?
One of the perspectives I really like to gain is, how do you think this is going to help you advance in your career?
Welcome to the How I Hired podcast. Today we've got Dustin Joost. Dustin and I have known each other for many years, gotten to know each other at former companies. I've watched his rise to be a CRO and been really impressed with how he thinks about talent. And today we're just going to talk about all aspects of finding, hiring, and growing early talent in companies. Dustin, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. I appreciate it, Andy.
That's great. Well, hey, maybe we start off with how do you think about building out an executive role? Like if you've taken over a team and you need to hire like your number two, like how do you do that?
Oh man, it's a big question.
Yeah.
First, I learned early on that they have to pass my dog's vibe check, even though she just kind of like sits here on the couch. She's a really important role in the hiring process. But beyond that, I think we always have to look at qualities and skills rather than experience. Mm-hmm. Early on in my career, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned, and most revenue leaders, as they're rising up through that director to VP and then C-level revenue leadership, I think they hire a lot for repeatability, right? Like as humans, we naturally look for some level of pattern matching. So we are trying to find people who looked and sounded like the top performers that we already had. And that works, but we also have to realize that businesses mature. And so suddenly when the business matures and you've hired for this certain pattern, you have blind spots everywhere. So my lesson was you have to optimize for complementary excellence and not carbon copies. I think another important lesson that I learned early on was stage fit, right? I've been at seed stage, Series A, Series B, growth equity, to then getting acquired and sucked into a big publicly traded company. And every good revenue leader knows that you fundamentally become a different company at each of those different stages. And so when you're looking for that second degree, that lieutenant, you want somebody who has been at that probably earliest stage, but has the intellectual curiosity, the hunger, and most importantly, the self-awareness. Like the combination of those three characteristics makes somebody just incredibly deadly, because that means they're coachable. That means they have that intellectual curiosity to learn more about themselves when they combine that with self-awareness, but also the intellectual curiosity to just understand how the company's evolving, how the market and the buyer personas, the buyer process is evolving. And then let's be honest, how go-to-market tools and the role of AI is evolving on like a quarterly basis these days. So it's really that learning velocity that I look for. I think the other thing when it comes to that lieutenant is the ability for them to just fit into anywhere in the customer journey. I have a fantastic director of sales, who's very much on his way to becoming a VP of sales at Osano. And when he first joined the company, I said, hey, Jake, I want you to go be an AE for a little while. Mm. And he ran some deals and then moved into that sales manager role. And he always thought a level above. So he was executing at his current level, but was ultimately able to be thinking through strategy, structure, people, and process to just constantly punch up.
I so love that. There's so much here that deeply aligns with my philosophies. Were you the hiring manager for Jake, when did you kind of see that in the process? When did you find it? Was it, like, because some of those intangibles that you described, I agree with, right? Where you look at background, you look at resume and they have to pass that first bar, but it's like, Are you assessing that in the hiring process? Is that discovered in the first 2 or 3 weeks? Is that later on? And like, when did you know you had a gem there?
Yeah, I mean, as much as you assess it in the hiring process, you really see the dots connect when somebody just hits the ground running in their first few weeks. It's like when we talk about salespeople, we know whether or not they're going to be good in their first 30 days. I think when it comes to sales leadership, marketing leadership, you see the same. And it shows up in a few ways: how they interact with others, the level of questions that they ask, and the way that they build relationships. Do they actually over-index on the human relationship, or do they find the right balance of establishing trust in a relationship, but doing so through the lens of both personal and professional development? And, I certainly saw that within Jake. And I know he's probably listening to this and he'll laugh at the fact that we had a pretty long interview process with him. He was actually one of those candidates that came in very early on in the process. And I said, wow, he's really solid, but gosh, I may be missing things. And let's be honest, the talent market over the last few years has just totally shifted. And I mean, we're talking about when I first joined Osano, it was difficult to hire. OTEs were crazy and through the roof. And so when we were a Series A company back then, competing with AWS, who's throwing out 350K OTEs when you're 2 years out of school, that's pretty tough. But then all of a sudden, the talent market immediately shifted. And it was like, wow, there's so much talent that's available. And I think as revenue leaders, we actually have to account for that. We need to understand where in this talent cycle we are to really determine what kind of profile is available. Am I needing to find somebody who might be a little bit more junior on experience, but I need to index on coachability just because what's available in the time that I need to hire? Or is it a little bit more rich where I know that there's some fantastically talented folks out there, and that's going to change your recruiting process and how you partner with HR, your recruiters. So I think recognizing that was key. But, going back to your question, it really just takes those first few weeks to see how they interact with customers, with other internal stakeholders, and with their own team, how they build that level of trust, but also the level of the weeds that they want to get in.
I love that. Maybe we'll step back and we'll kind of like start with how do you find talent in the first place? But I'm excited to then eventually at the end get to like those first couple of weeks are so critical for me. So I'm excited to dive into that too. Like, say you've got a new senior level role. You need to go find that. Like, how do you do that? And I love your comment around different markets, different times, but like, are you working your own network? Are you working with recruiters? Are you calling the VC talent teams? Like what's your tactics there for a senior level?
A little of all the above. What I love about recruiting is it allows us as revenue leaders to step back into the shoes of a seller, right? We need to be doing our own outbounding. We need to be working our networks. We need to be curating inbound. So I can't say that there's one particular channel. I do very much value my HR business partners, my recruiting partners. Shout out to Blueprint Expansion and Chuck and the team over there. But I think you start there to really build up what that inbound channel looks like. From an outbound perspective, I think that's where it really gets fun. I'm somebody who you have to constantly be recruiting, right? It's not just when you have a role. I think it's also easy for us to kind of, have to rush and try to make hires sometimes. So, I like to have this idea of just-in-time hiring sprints where we're always thinking 2 quarters out. If the average time to fill a role, and, if this isn't your benchmark, then ask your HR business partner. But for me, it's usually around those 90 days from the day that it's open to the day that, offer might be finalized or accepted. You can get that down to 60 days. But, ultimately, if you want to build up that pipeline, give yourself enough time. So always be planning 2 quarters out and think of it as a hiring sprint. Always do this kind of 90-day hiring retros. So think of it just like a product sprint. Inspect the metrics, right? What are the channels where we're seeing the most candidates come through? Where are the highest quality candidates actually converting? Where are we running into bottlenecks in the process? Where are we running into bottlenecks in the feedback process as well, right? And have specific SLAs with your interviewing committee on how fast they submit feedback and hold them accountable to it. Manage in public as well, right? I think the other thing that has been most critical for me is this concept of a bench pipeline, right? And this is where you just always need to be recruiting, but having conversations at least once a week with a candidate who's out there to understand the talent market, but to also keep those candidates warm and always have 3 to 5 kind of pre-vetted candidates. So that way you have urgency without lowering the bar.
So you're always recruiting then. It's just like you're always selling, you're always recruiting, right?
Always be recruiting, always be closing. It goes hand in hand.
Are there times when you don't post the role? It sounds like you use your talent team a lot, but is there ever an experience without naming the person, and why would you not post a role?
Yeah, I'm one of those who I don't believe in the ghost roles either, right? Like if you don't have a role and an intentionality to actually hire somebody, then why are you wasting a candidate's time and saying, hey, fill this out, submit your resume? I do like the idea of future roles, not necessarily these evergreen roles, but hey, a future opportunity. If you want to join our company, we don't have a role today, but please submit your information so you're at least in our ATS. But other than that, I think it is our responsibility as revenue leaders to always be thinking about talent because, in SaaS, people are 80% of our expenses, if not more. So therefore, we need to be curating the most impactful asset, which is people. And that's what ultimately our superpowers should be as revenue leaders, is identifying great people and then building the right culture, the environment, the strategy, structure, people, and process to just allow their skills to flourish in our environment.
I love that. Okay, so say you've got a role open. How do people get to you, right? Like I think part of our audience is like senior execs starting to figure out the next role. Like, especially in a tight market like this, what's going to break through to Dustin?
Yeah. There's a lot of noise out there. I'll be the first to say, of course, the first thing you should do is always go ahead and apply, right? I never like to go outside of our recruiting processes if we have a role open, because I don't want to step on our HR business partners' toes. We have a very intentional process. And so I like there to be equity in the hiring process no matter what. And so even if we know each other, first thing you do is just go and apply. So you're in the ATS and I'll flag an application to our team if it's somebody I know or somebody that's been referred to us. So then you have to get creative, right? Again, as sellers, as marketers, whatever role we're applying to, how do you get on my radar? LinkedIn is still valuable. Yes, our inboxes on LinkedIn are just blowing up. But I think the creativity on how you get my attention, think of it as a customer journey: awareness, interest, intent, and decision. So how are you bringing awareness to your candidacy? I love people who go outside of the inbox and start posting on things that I have posted.
Yes.
If I'm sharing something about news in our company, I love for somebody to just leave a comment. Wow, I just saw your name. I always look at that. So that name and pattern recognition is going to be really powerful. I want to see that level of enthusiasm, especially if it's a sales role. I like to think of sales as transferring our enthusiasm about the ability to solve a buyer's problem. Well, that's the same thing you're doing when you're applying for a role. You should be transferring your enthusiasm to me about your fit and your ability to make an impact here at Osana or whatever company. So I think it's about applying your sales, your marketing methodology there. And then, of course, referrals, right? I think everybody today is looking through first, second, third degree connections. Don't be afraid to reach out to folks who might be a second degree connection of mine and say, hey, I see you're connected to Dustin. I'm really interested in this role. Here's a message I would love for you to send Dustin. What else can I do to make this easy for you? I will always accept those, respond to those, and then, of course, flag the application so there's equity in the hiring process.
When you, I love that. The commenting on posts is huge. I think we all have small egos too, right? And it's I love it when people are telling I loved your post or this or that. And I think the enthusiasm it really resonates with me too, because I see some people being I don't know, I'm still playing the field and this and that. I'm no, you got to be all in for every role because that's definitely what people are looking for. So say somebody back channels to you and you flag it, because I do that all the time, right? Hey, post bigger companies, I'll often post roles. Sometimes I won't when I know they're going to be overloaded. But when you flag it to your recruiting team, how does that change their thinking, right? In your mind? Is it if you flag somebody, are you sitting there being okay, this person? Okay, maybe here's a different one. Say I refer you to somebody that's just not qualified. Will they still chat with you? Or will you even send that to the recruiting team? Or do you just, I like Andy, but still I'm going to do that. How'd you handle that one?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the degree of not qualified. Yes, experience is important, but I'm not looking for experience in this specific industry. I'll try to do as much assessment on LinkedIn and then, of course, Googling them to understand what kind of characteristics might this person have that goes beyond their work experience. If I'm still not seeing a match, then hey, I'm going to flag that to our HR team. I'll probably flag it to the person that referred them as well. Depending on what's going on here at work, then I might not take that intro call to just kind of have that quick conversation. At the very least, I might reach out to that candidate and say, hey, I know so-and-so referred you. I don't quite see a match because, we might be looking for an AE in your background is entirely in product or something, right? Like if there's truly no experience fit, then I might flag that. But I ideally still want to have a conversation with them. It might not be right then, but again, going back to always recruiting. And I also think as revenue leaders, it's our responsibility to not just recruit for our team. It's our responsibility to recruit for the entire company.
Good point.
So, I pride myself in that level of cross-functional collaboration and leadership where I should know what kind of product leaders our chief product officer is looking for. Maybe it's not as much on the engineering team because, I'm not going to be able to speak their language as well, but I want to help my peers on the executive team just build great people because ultimately in a company, we all own revenue. It's just I've got the largest target on my back for that, right? But in order for us to be successful in owning revenue, we've got to build a culture of people who understand that. And so I'll constantly be looking for opportunities to introduce other executive leaders to candidates.
That's awesome. It sounds like people can break through to you. I'm the same way. Have you ever hired anybody where you're like, because I think you talked a lot about the qualities that maybe are on the resume. Like, have you found yourself sometimes being surprised by a candidate in the process where you're like they were not my number 1, 2, or 3 choice on paper when I first got them or when the hiring team manager did them? And like any story there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are my favorite stories, right? These are the surprises that make you learn so much as a leader and understand how to really assess and value people based at a characters and values level. I've got 2, and both of these people are probably going to hopefully listen to this, but one of those is teachers. I love hiring teachers, but I didn't know this until I hired a teacher. It was back at Your Cause, one of my early sales hires. I saw this resume come through, at that point, it was just came through a LinkedIn apply. Like she had been a teacher for 7 years, first grade teacher. And this is before I had kids. So like, I didn't really, know how to value what teachers go through. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Her resume was really nicely formatted. And like, I think she did a good job of trying to translate the role of a teacher into what it means to be in software sales. And I'll never forget part of this. We had them do a presentation. Her deck design was just awesome. I mean, it was beautiful. It was so simple. And I was surprised by that. But the funniest part is when we had them come into the office and do a presentation, she was like, hey, look, I'm a teacher and I stand up most of the day. Do you mind if I like stand up and I have a little thing to set my computer on? So we got this little plastic desk and put it up on our desk. And she just stood up there like a teacher and presented. And I'm cracking myself up, but she did such a good job presenting her story and translating the role and values of a teacher to software sales. And it made me realize truly what teachers have to do because they're speaking to 30 different students who are all over the place when it comes to, the way they learn and their learning style. And I didn't realize that, teachers at the end of the day have to take each of those individual students and figure out how to meet them where they're at, which is what we do in sales. We have to meet the prospect where they're at, but they have to do so in a one-to-many capacity, not just a one-to-one. And so that to me is like the mark of a really good sales leader as well. How do you influence in a one-to-one and a one-to-many capacity? And, I look back and 5-6 years later, she was my lieutenant, director of sales and just did a fantastic job building Your Cause with me. Another one, though, are folks who have theater backgrounds. I am somebody who really values storytelling. And this was a former stage actor turned AE, and it was his theatrical timing that let him turn his product demos into just mini stories that had this level of tension and payoff and suspense. And that's exactly what complex buyers have needed in my more enterprise and mid-market or category creation motions like data privacy. And so it reminded me that storytelling beats technical jargon when you sell change. And so the other part of that was like theater is like, okay, well, how curious are you going to be because you're not really listening. You are just projecting in theater. But I also didn't realize that, great actors, they are so curious about the characters that they are becoming, that if you can apply that intellectual curiosity in sales, that translates really well.
Dude, I love that you've got those ones. I've hired a bunch of teachers, but often for enablement. They're just amazing at it.
Totally.
So do you have a favorite interview question? Sometimes, like, at least for me, I ask the same question every time, because then I can gauge the answer and I know where to take it. I'm curious if there's one that's going to come out in every interview people have with Dustin.
Yeah. It definitely depends a little bit on the role, whether it's an IC or more of a leadership type role. One of the perspectives I really like to gain is, how do you think this is going to help you advance in your career? Because at this point, you're now asking them to almost repeat what they know about this role, what the expectations of this role are. And again, you're trying to gauge their storytelling. What's the story that they're going to craft about how this role is going to help them grow and ultimately get to where they're going next? So it answers a lot of questions in just one single question. If I'm looking a little bit more at a leadership, but I also love to ask this to ICs as well, is if you could wave a magic wand and fix one recurring friction point between sales and another function, what would it be and why? And this surfaces that level of cross-functional empathy and systems level problem solving in their instinct for storytelling. So again, I'm trying to get back to that why. So those three elements help me understand how are they going to act within other leaders. But then as a seller, what's the level of empathy for the role that they play in the entire customer journey? So the last thing we want is that kind of lone wolf salesperson. We want somebody who understands, here I am in the customer journey, but here is what marketing has done. Here's what SDRs have done. Here's what finance, legal, everybody else has to do to help us all own revenue.
I love that. If I'm the manager of the person hiring, my favorite question, because they get to me late in the process, is, in your own words, describe the role you're interviewing for.
Yes.
And it's perfect, because some people will just take themselves out right there, right? Like and other people will be like, yeah, you get exactly what we're trying to do. And I love that one, because it's like, have they listened? Do they understand? And can they articulate that one?
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, you're kind of hitting on that curiosity, translating into more of a story. And it shows how passionate they really are about the role. If they can speak to that with enthusiasm, then again, they're transferring their enthusiasm.
Dude, I love that. Maybe let's start. So with the kind of the time we have left, I'd love to dive into like you've hired them. So like Jake, for example, right? Like what are your tactics to both make them successful, and how soon do you know if somebody is great?
Yeah. The tactics to make them successful are, first, you have to outline expectations, right? I like to think of everything, and you've heard me use these words: strategy, structure, people, and process. And that's not to say that strategy is more important than people, but you can have the most talented people in the world, and if you haven't given them a strategy, communicated the strategy, or it's not a good strategy, I'm sorry, but you set them up for failure. So once you figure out the strategy, you have to figure out, what's the structure that we need to accomplish that strategy? What are the skills and talents and the characteristics of people that can best fit into that structure to accomplish the strategy? And then lastly is process. And, processes are usually the easiest to change. They're the most dynamic. And so you can really architect processes around the three other areas. And so you give that to them to set those expectations. The other thing I really like to index on is mindsets. There's a fantastic book by the Arbinger Institute called The Outward Mindset. And it's all about how processes and methodologies will only go so far to change behaviors. But if you can empower people with a set of mindsets that put customers and each other at the center of everything, you've empowered them to make their own decisions on the fly. You've knocked out probably 50 to 60% of what you need to do as a leader. So you start with that. And if you can equip them with those things, then you kind of push them off the cliff a little bit. You empower them and let them see, you see how they work, but stay close. And this is where you have to have the right kind of cross-functional skip level, the right level of inspection on how people are reacting to that leader, the kind of decisions that they're making. You push them off a cliff, but you monitor them, right? Trust needs to be built. It isn't immediately given, but to build trust, you have to let people fly. And so you do those things. Again, for me, it kind of takes those probably first 30 to 60 days to really understand if they're the right fit at a mindset value perspective. And then you're also starting to see that degree of execution. Because again, people can be really good at managing up, but if they're not executing day to day in the weeds, then they're not going to get there. And that's where I like to look at it again. Either it's a marketing leader, RevOps leader, or an AE. Like, how deep are they getting into it? As a sales leader, are they hungry enough to go run a sales cycle themselves? As a marketing leader, how many customer calls have they hopped on? How many prospect calls have they hopped on? What are the gong analysis that they're coming out with? If it's RevOps, how deep have you gone into the data to proactively bring some insights? I think RevOps as well. We know RevOps operates on a bit of a spectrum. You've got reactive on one side, proactive on the other. And it can be really concerning if somebody's just indexing on that reactive side. So how quickly can they get to a proactive level while maybe identifying the reactive elements that need to be fixed? We know there's always going to be some of that. So I think, to summarize it is like empower them, but let them build the trust with you. What's the quality of things that they're bringing to the weekly one-on-one? Are they kind of letting you lead the one-on-one, or are they bringing you insights and genuine concerns and saying, hey, this is something I flagged. Is this something you've also seen? Here's maybe a solution that I have, but what are your ideas there? Because again, nobody's going to know the exact solutions in their first probably 90 days, but the curiosity and the brainstorming, that's what I'm looking for.
I love it. How do you course correct? Or if you had an example of where you need to course correct somebody?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely comes down to expectations, right? It goes back to this level of curiosity. Is if somebody hasn't met the expectations that I've laid out, it isn't immediately I've got the stick, right? It's a little bit of, well, why? What's the root cause behind this? And whatever your framework is, the 5 whys, or, for me, it's a little bit of that gut feel of trying to understand, again, the mindset that led them to behaving or making that decision, or the lack of behaviors that I've seen, whatever it is, what ultimately got them there. And I think that's where I then try to make some sort of subjective call on, is this an inherent behavior that's a mismatch between our values, the culture add that I'm looking for, because I'm not just looking for culture fit, I want culture add, experience, expectations, whatever it is it the way that they're thinking, and can I influence the way that they're thinking? If I did the right things during the hiring process, I'm looking to make sure that I can influence the way that they're thinking, which will then translate to their behaviors, their learning velocity, the speed at which they implement feedback. But sometimes you don't see that. And if you don't see that, you're giving the feedback and you're not seeing the immediate receptiveness, but more importantly, the immediate implementation of changes. And again, even if they don't know how to implement those changes, I'm looking for the curiosity and the confidence to come back to me and say, hey, I'm kind of lost on how I can actually solve this. Can you help me? That's where I kind of gauge, do they really have a hunger to grow?
That's awesome, man. I love that. I found that early course correcting can help them. Have you ever had one where you've had to make the hard call on in that first 90 days?
Yeah, I mean, definitely at the IC level. I think we all, it probably took me a good 3 to 4 years of hiring before I kind of learned what I really need to assess in the hiring process. But, even calling that out because of the talent market. And then, of course, us coming in, whether you're early stage or coming into a new company and needing to move fast and make quick decisions, but you don't know what you don't know. That's where the course correction happens fast. I will say on the sales leader side, that's sometimes, I think for me, has always been, you've got to put the right effort on the front end. CS leadership, sales leadership, marketing leadership, whatever it is. I think what I've discovered more is, you hire somebody for the right stage. It's actually more of a question of, can they evolve into the next stage, or do they not have the ability? Like, are they just really good at that stage? And sometimes that varies from companies to company. One person who's really good in this industry at a Series A can punch up to the Series B, Series C, and beyond, but they go to a different industry and maybe they're even at a different point in their career and they're not motivated or willing to make the changes that are necessary. That's where I usually find more of the incongruencies with leadership, not necessarily on those kind of initial hires.
That's great. It's helping people break through those moments when they could be more senior, but they see them. I feel like those are those magical gifts you can give, and they're hard to deliver. But it's like I delivered one recently where it's like, you will be at this level for the rest of your career unless you can break through this thing.
Yeah. Do you feel like even making them realize that motivated them to then navigate change in a new way?
Yeah, I do. Like I'd say I always love to give feedback, and I'll be like, I'm going to give it to you. It may sting a little bit, but like marinate on it. And then I want to really talk about it with you because I care about your career. Another speech I know we're podcasting you, but I love doing it. I always give the people a speech of like, I'm here for your whole career, not just your career at company X. And I think that really opens people up, right? Like it's also I want people to tell me before they leave. I don't want to be surprised, right? Like I'm not going to take their head off. Like there's a reason for it, and it's probably a good reason.
Yeah. That's why I go back to that question in the interview process of like, how does this fit into your overall career? Because I want people, when they're assessing whether or not I'm the right leader to join and trust me, I want them to know that like, hey, there will be a point in time where this isn't going to be your forever home, but I want this to be such a tremendous story for you that it makes it really easy to go on to that next chapter. So yeah, that resonates with me, Andy.
That's great. Well, I love this. This is great, man. I think the moral of the story is like, work for Dustin. He will help you grow your career. Jake, I look forward to meeting you one day. Hopefully we'll have you on the podcast when you are CRO as well too, Jake. And so congratulations, Dustin. I love all of our conversations and really excited to, stay in touch as we build on the careers and help each other find great people.
Yeah, this has been really fun to nerd out with you, Andy. So looking forward to hearing some more guests on the pod. And congrats on launching this.
Thank you, man. Have a great weekend, and we will talk soon.
You as well.